Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Hey Sister. Hey Sister, how you doing?
Hey, sister. It's Sunday, getting ready for another work week.
Oh, well, if you're out there getting ready for another work week, we want you to sit back and relax and enjoy the conversation this evening. We are super excited to have joining us tonight the man, the myth, the legend, our father. Going to introduce him here in a second. But what we'd like you to do is go ahead and on your respective pages, share this broadcast because tonight we're going to talk about fatherhood. Right now in the news, Black men are all over the news, and some of it is not for very positive reasons. But one thing that we know is that Black fathers have played a role in our lives, right? So it's very interesting, and I posted it today there, how stereotypes get formed, how these narratives get formed. But our father's always been there. And we had our father, we had our grandfathers, we have uncles, cousins, so many different people who were very active and engaged in our lives. So where do you think this narrative started?
I think the narrative started with the government's actual attempt to destroy the Black family. I think that we have so many different times in our history, from the time we got to this country, how men and women were treated, separated out, who could marry whom, breeding, all of those things. We've had a troubled history since we've gotten here, and there was a deliberate effort to destroy the Black family, it seems, from the very beginning. And we know if you destroy the head of the house, right? If you destroy the father, then you will inevitably destroy the family. So I think that's where those stereotypes where they began, about, absenteeism and things like that. I think it's important to have conversations like this because we need to change the narrative and make sure that we don't perpetuate those stereotypes.
Absolutely. Well, we already have some folks who are tuning in. So Jody said, hey, sisters. Hey, Jody. We got LaSonia tuning in. We got Tiffany. We have Trellis. So, hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. As we said, please go ahead and like this, like us on our Hey Sister page. Share this broadcast. Make sure you're following us. Follow us on YouTube as well. So if you ever miss a live broadcast, you can always catch us there. But we are so very excited tonight because we are going to be having a conversation about fatherhood with our father. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Obie C. Hill. Hey, Daddy.
Good evening.
And happy Father's Day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
How are you this evening?
I'm doing good.
Fantastic.
Good. Yep.
So, as we prepared for this show, we try to just let you know this is going to be a free-flowing conversation. We know you can be verbose because you created two very verbose daughters who always have a lot to say about a lot of things. But we're really looking forward to having this conversation about fatherhood with you, and say happy Father's Day. And thank you for being such a strong role model in our lives. And it was interesting because I shared a post, like I said earlier today, and one of my good friends, Daria, she said, thank you for being being like a father to her as well. So you played the role for many people, and you may not, I saw that look of surprise. That surprised you. Tell us why that surprises you.
Well, I guess sometimes we know instinctively that we are having an impression on people, but we don't think about that as, fitting us as individuals. We just think about that in the theoretical sense, So on the one hand, I'm surprised because, I just never would have thought that I had that type of impression on Daria.
Mm-hmm. Well, you did. And you probably had that impression on many as well. But tell us first, I want to just get back into your history and your background. So you are a Mississippi boy, married a Louisiana girl. We won't talk about Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn, that song, but Mississippi woman, Louisiana woman, Mississippi man. But before you came to Louisiana, you are a young boy from Enterprise, Mississippi.
Right.
So tell us about your growing up and your relationship with your father.
I guess in a sense, in one word, I could say, as a young person, the relationship was complicated because my dad was a very, very strong and forceful person. I guess he was what you would call from the old school, and, he believed in hard work, and he did not believe in idleness. We had to work. We lived on a little 5-acre piece of land. I guess we could call it a farm. And we had to work very, very hard to maintain that. Now, when I came along, I learned years later that my dad had lost a lot of the properties that he owned. He had owned a sawmill at one time and some other things. He had lost those, but he still instilled in us the ability to work hard. So I did take that from him. But on the one hand, my dad never showed a lot of emotion. I almost saw him cry when my mother died at age 12, but he held back. He just was not going to show that type of emotion, and I never knew that her life had such an impact on him. And then when she did pass away, almost 60 years ago now, he kind of went to pieces. He moved to Florida. I think I was in the 9th grade at the time. And I did not see him again until I was a junior in college. And so I guess a good way to characterize him is that, sometimes when you have that persona of being a very, very tough guy, you don't realize the impact that a spouse or a significant other has on you. And I think sometimes that, especially then as opposed to now, it's okay to show weakness. It's okay to show vulnerability. And he never learned how to do that. And I think that's why it had such a negative impact on him. But still in all, I did learn the value of hard work from him. But in a perverse way, I also learned that, no matter what, you stay with your family. You do not give up on your family.
Wow, that's very deep. And I see we have some family who is tuning in tonight. So family, if y'all want to chime in the comments, ask your questions and share your experiences with our father, we would welcome that as well. So you mentioned that your mother passed away when you were 12. Right. And so who were some of the men who then played a role of father in your life when your father, as you said, he moved away and then you didn't see him for a number of years? Who were some of the men that played the role of father in your life?
Well, I had just before, Daddy moved to Florida, I had moved to Moss Point, Mississippi to live with my aunt by marriage and her husband, Mr. Herbert Buckley. He had a stroke and I was going there to help take care of him. Unfortunately, 2 months in, he passed away. But one of his dying requests to her, and of course, she was not really related to me other than by marriage, but one of his dying requests to her was, and I'm quoting here, "Keep that boy with you, you're gonna need him." Okay. And so I stayed with her, throughout high school. The fortunate thing, and you all know that I'm an educator. I've been in education all of my professional career. The fortunate thing about those days that for myself and a lot of other African American males. We had a lot of black male teachers in the schools, and the black male teachers in our school, pretty much took me under their wing, and I learned a lot of things from them. Now I didn't realize some of the lessons they had taught me to years later, but just their presence. Mr. Ward was my first high school basketball coach. Mr. Polk was my second high school basketball coach. Mr. Joseph, was our counselor. Mr. Sebring was the principal. He's a tough man, but he was a very fair man, and all of those men, I learned lessons from them that, have stayed with me to this very day. I remember very distinctly, Mr. Sebring, he had never hesitated to chastise me or any of the other boys if we did something wrong. But at the same time, he would pull you aside sometime and say, you're too good to be acting a fool the way you're acting, and I expect you to straighten up. Don't get me wrong. A lot of those men had flaws, like we all do. But at the end of the day, I learned more valuable lessons from them that helped me to become what I am today than I can say otherwise.
Yeah. Well, that is, so those are the men who played their role in those formative years when you were coming up in Mississippi, but then you moved to Louisiana. So as some know that, or may not know who are watching in this broadcast, at the age of 18, so graduating from high school in Moss Point, you were Louisiana bound, and you were kind of tapped really to integrate the athletic program at Nicholls State University in Thibodaux, Louisiana. So, so tell us about that transition, and who were then some of the men who played that role of mentor and guide in your life.
Well, first of all, it was Nicholls State College at the time. It changed the name to university in 1970. When I first visited the campus out of a courtesy.
Because you had no intentions of going there, right?
I had no intentions of going there. But I remember, on my second visit to the campus, the president of the university at the time, Dr. Vernon Galliano, was talking to an African-American coach from Jackson, Mississippi, who had also brought a young man down to for them to look at, to try to recruit. His name was Thomas Anderson. I'll never forget, a very gregarious and outgoing person. And the coach, they didn't know I was listening, but the coach asked Dr. Galliano, why are y'all integrating this program at this time? And he basically said, it's time to do it. It's just time to do it. And I remember that because, when I was back in high school, Mr. Polk, Coach Polk, my high school coach, was also pushing me. And he just basically pulled me aside one day. He said, Cleve, it's time that some of these schools that are predominantly white integrate. You're the right person to do it. So it's time to get it done. So I kind of juxtaposed those two statements from two different men, one black and one white. And I guess something just clicked in me and said, well, maybe it is time to do it. And so when I got there, it was a total alien situation for me. But one of the interesting things is that the assistant basketball coach at the time was named Lloyd LeBlanc. And he pulled me aside one day. Actually, he had took me on a recruiting trip with him, and we were coming back. And he said something to me I'll never forget. He said, I don't know too much about colored people. That was the vernacular of the time. I don't know too much about colored people. He said, I've never been around them. I've never known anybody, and he said, I need to learn how to deal with colored people. And he basically said, will you teach me? Now, I'm a freshman in college, and I have a grown man asking me to teach him. To me, that was a sincere lesson. Even at that age, even at 19 years old, I realized that this was a sincere effort for a grown man to learn something. And so in a dynamic way or a reverse role there, even though he was trying to learn from me, I took that as a form of mentorship. And that carried me a long way. And of course, Coach Landry, my head coach, which I thought he was crazy when I was playing for him. But, as I said at the banquet a couple of years ago, he got smarter as I got older. So, a lot of the things that he taught me helped me along the way. So my two college coaches, Jerry Sanders became a college coach later on. All of those people were instrumental in me becoming the person that I am today.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you on that road to becoming the person you are today. So you met this woman in Louisiana. You eventually decide to get married and have children. I don't know what were you thinking? And then you had two daughters to boot. So what was that like, being the father or being the one man in a house full of three women?
Well, I learned to keep my mouth shut a lot because I didn't get a chance to talk very much, But it was a great experience. You can read all the books in the world about raising children, but everybody have their own unique situations. And I look back on it, we were blessed. We were fortunate to be able to help you and Christina become the young ladies that you are today. There was no rule book of how to do it. I think we did it in a different way. I certainly didn't know anything about helping to raise girls because, growing up, my mama had one daughter and all the rest of us were boys. So there were no lessons there to be learned, So, yeah, I think we were truly blessed. And I think we were truly fortunate to have you all turn out the way and you all have turned out. On the other hand, I have often questioned myself. Would I have been able to do as well if we had had boys? And to this day, I can't answer that question. I just don't know, So, I'm going to throw this in there, and this may not seem relevant at this time, but I've always considered myself to be a person that followed Christian principles, Christian teachings. I don't wear it on my sleeves. And for years, I didn't, attend church. But I've grown in spirituality over the years, and I've grown in understanding some things that I never even thought about before. And so one of the things I have really come to understand, there's a teaching in the Bible about God has a plan for everybody's life. And I still, to this day, I believe that my marrying your mother and you all coming along, I've come to believe that's part of God's plan. I never intended to marry anybody from Louisiana. I never intended to stay in Louisiana. You
didn't intend to go to Louisiana in the first place.
Exactly. And, your mom, when I first met her, I didn't like her and she didn't like me. And so, but I think it was part of his plan. And so, hey, here we are today.
All right. Well, you have a couple comments here from your son-in-law. He said, in terms of raising a son, he said you would have done just fine. He also says, I know that because you have stepped into the gap for me and Devin, even when you didn't realize it. So,
Well, I appreciate that, Jeff. And I don't know what I did, but if I did something good, hey, it's all good.
well, that's for sure.
I do have to say that, talking to my grandson sometimes like pulling teeth more. It's a chore.
Well, you said that you also were very quiet. You tell us all the time how Devin reminds you of yourself in some aspects when you were his age. So tell us more about you, being a young man, obviously losing your mother had a significant impact on you. Your father leaving, being raised by your you're going to stay with your great aunt and well, not your great aunt, my great aunt, but your aunt and uncle and all of those things. So how were you as a young man? Tell us about yourself as that teenage boy or even younger boy.
Well, I suffered from lack of self-confidence for a long time. Even into adulthood, sometimes I would find myself in positions, assistant basketball coach, assistant professor, and sometimes I look in the mirror, why am I here? I'm not worthy of these roles and things like that. So self-confidence was something that I lacked along the way. I never had this quit attitude. I've always forged on, even if things got tough. But I doubted myself for a long time. I guess, I've always tried to be a person that tried to please everybody. Probably tried to please too many people. I've always been the one that was a peacemaker. A lot of the things that I did, growing up, I did not realize I was doing it until people reminded me of those things when I got to be an adult. You probably don't remember, but when I was in my 50th birthday celebration, I had just become Dean of Education at Nicholls. One of our old college classmates, she got up and made a speech. And she said that, when we used to go out, when we were in college, go to nightclubs and stuff like that, I would always be the one to say, okay, it's time for us to go home. And she said something to the effect like, who do you think you are telling us we have to get up and go? But we all eventually would get up and go because it was the right thing to do. I guess what she was saying is that I had leadership skills that I didn't know I had until I was a grown man. I think that has been one of the characteristics that has carried me a long way. For some reason, I tell my grandson this all the time. Now that I know better, you can be a follower or you can be a leader. Choose to be a leader if you can. And sometimes you're going to be chosen to be a leader, whether you know it or not. It's a role that you might not want, but it's a role that you have to accept sometimes. So I guess let's kind of summarize it. I had a lot of self-confidence issues, but I also had a lot of organizational and leadership skills as a young man that carried me into my adulthood. And I had to get to be an adult to realize that I did have those skills.
Well, sister, I know you've been ready to chime in. I've been talking the whole time. We'll let you. Why don't you ask what questions do you have?
Thank you, because you were going to make me forget them all. Every time Daddy started saying something new, I was like, I'm going to forget the questions. Okay. So the first question I wanted to ask you with regards to the leadership skills that you just spoke to, as well as the fact that at 18, 19 years old, again, you were tapped to integrate the program at Nicholls State University. All of those things came with a lot of responsibility. How did you have the wherewithal and the strength as a teenager to take all of that in stride and to continue to be that level-headed person? Because let's face it, you were hit with a lot of stuff all at one time, and it probably lasted a lot longer than you've even talked about. That's a lot of responsibility for a young person. So how have you been able to endure and keep a cool head and be so level-headed?
You know, that's a kind of a tough question, especially when you look at the makeup of my family. You know,
Yes, that's why I'm asking it.
yeah, you know, my daddy, your grandfather, you know, he had a short fuse sometimes, and I never had that. You know, I guess to start off with, Chrissy, I probably took more after my mother than I did my dad. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. You know, I hung around my mother a lot, even though she passed away when I was 12. In those 12 years, you know, I hung around her a lot. My mother was a very quiet and gentle person. Now, she could get angry, don't get me wrong. If you pushed her far enough, then you would regret it, to put it that way. But for the most part, she was this very congenial, quiet, loving person. And I used to be around all the time. We sit and watch soap operas together. I watched soap operas when I was 8, 9 years old. The Edge of Night, The Brighter Day, and stuff like that. And we used to sit down and talk about the stories and stuff like that. So that's what they called the soap operas back in those days. They called it the story. Yeah. So I took a lot of that gentleness from her. And one thing that, you know, the hindsight is always 20/20, but one thing that I remember distinctly is that people like to come to our house when my mother was alive. And I think it was because of her. I didn't understand it then, but I think some of those characteristics rubbed off on me, because after about 8 months, 9 months into my freshman year in college, even though I integrated a program, even though I was the only African-American athlete in that program, and I'm talking about all sports, you know, several months into the program, I started to notice that, you know, the guys started to gravitate toward me for the most part, not everybody. They wanted to be around me. And then my sophomore year, believe it or not, I was the first sophomore in the history of the basketball team to be elected team captain. For some reason, the guys wanted to gravitate and be around me and thrust me into positions of leadership. And I think I can trace all of that back to my mother, the type of person she was. And I think that I carried that into my young adulthood and all the way into my adulthood now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am going to have to pray for the spirit of Florine Hill to come into my life, because I feel John Curtis is all around me. The other question I wanted to ask you, just speaking of that, you know, we get to listen in on some of the family conversations, and it seems like, and I think, Kitty, you might have said it recently that, Demetria, you may have said it recently that, you know, praise God that a lot of our family members are still alive, because you and your siblings seem to get into some wild and crazy stuff when they were younger. Now, you seem to, you know, you were just talking about how you were as a kid, but what was the craziest thing that you got yourself into? Because we know, you know, your brothers was riding bicycles across bridges and trying to put firecrackers in their mouth and stuff.
Well, you know,
right.
one thing to keep in mind is that all of us, you know, including, you know, your Aunt Pat, our only sister, you know, for the most part, you know, we treated people decently. And I think, you know, again, a lot of people like to be around all of us, you know, even though we did crazy things sometimes, they still gravitated toward most of the members of my family. I've never heard anybody say, oh, I don't want to go to their house. You know, people just like to be around. And I know I'm digressing a little bit here. I do remember distinctly, like when my older brothers, John Curtis, your Uncle Manny, Alfred, and Lee, they all moved away, went into the service, and moved to the northern states, New York, and places like that, New Jersey. When they would come home, everybody would be at the house. They would be playing the guitar, they'd be playing music, and everybody would come. It was like a circus, but people like to be at our house,
Well, they still do.
And they still do, and I don't feel bad about that. I think that's a good thing. I think that's what family should be about. But on the other hand, one of the craziest things that I've ever done was I got the idea one day that, let me give a little bit of, we burn wood for heat. We burn wood for cooking and things like that. And I got an idea one day that I could take a can of gasoline, invert it, hook a hose up to it, put a screen onto it, and as the gasoline would drip down, if I lit it, it would become a heater, And I thank God now, because every time I would try to light it, the gasoline would actually put the match out. If that thing had ignited, I would not be sitting here today. Believe me.
Right. And we would not either.
And you wouldn't be here either. So that was one of the craziest things that I ever did, but and there probably was some more, but that was one of the craziest and most dangerous.
Yes, that was a little bit. And then I think one of the other questions I just kind of wanted you to tell the story, because you told it to me once, because you mentioned how your dad wasn't really one to have a lot of emotion, but he showed his emotion in other ways. And you told me this, the story about the pork shoulder or whatever. So I just kind of wanted to, I think it was a pork shoulder or something you were saying.
Yeah.
Well,
he didn't show a lot of emotion as a young person growing up. He became a little bit more emotional in his golden years. Now, keep in mind, your granddaddy did not live to see 70.
Right.
And so in his 60s, of course, that's what I'm talking about. To me, those were his golden years. He was a little bit more emotional then. But he showed his love and affection for you, because when you went there, he always felt like he had to give you something. Okay. Sometimes didn't make any sense, but he didn't have a lot of money for sure, but he felt like he had to give you something. So I go one day and I'm there, and he goes into the freezer and he brings out this big pork roast, a shoulder roast, and he said, "Here." And I said, "Dad, I live in Louisiana. What am I going to do with this?" And he said, "Yeah, just take it home. You can find something to do with it." And I did. I brought it home and everything. But that's the type of person he was. He was not going to show a lot of emotion, but he felt like he had to give you something if you came to see him. Our cousin Jerome was the one that pointed that out to me several years ago before he passed away. He said, "You're never going to go to your dad's house that he doesn't give you something." That's his way of showing affection for you.
Well, we have a couple comments related to that. You talk about that family gathering. So a couple of cousins here. We have one said, "I love going on the hill when I was a child." Another one says, "Yes, going on the hill was a good childhood memories for me as well." Let's see what else we have here. We also have, thank you, Keisha. You've raised two absolutely wonderful, inspiring daughters. And another comment here from Colleen, who says, "Always been a role model to me, always looked up to you as a very distinguished gentleman." And Mississippi Standout from Mr. Charles Brown.
Stand up.
Oh, stand up, Mississippi Stand Up. I thought it said stand out. See, look, I read it my own way. Mississippi Stand Up. So yes, that's another Mississippi young man. So, yeah. Well, I wanted to, if we can, because, we, in lieu of hot topics, we wanted to incorporate some of the hot topics into our conversation with you tonight. So, a few weeks ago, as the civil unrest and uprising from the George Floyd murder took place, I called you and Mom and was having a conversation with you and just asked you how how you were feeling about everything that you were witnessing, because you had already witnessed so much of this in your youth. So you talked about going to college in 1968. So and being a young man from Mississippi. And so watching this social unrest, and it kind of stung me a little bit. It hurt my feelings because, like you said, you integrated this program, you lived there on that campus, you became a leader amongst your peers. But to say that you weren't surprised that we were right back at this place, that kind of hurt a little bit to me, because I certainly was hoping that we would be so much further at the age that I am now. So tell us about some of the things you witnessed and experienced growing up, and then do you have any hope for us moving forward?
Well, first of all, let me say a couple of things here. To the person that congratulated me on raising two wonderful daughters, I didn't do it by myself. I had a wife, and so we've collaborated on this. And sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree, but we tried never to disagree in front of you all. And second of all, Colleen, thank you for that. I never knew you felt that way. Total surprise. I just thought we were contemporaries, and it is what it is. Let me answer that question in two ways. First of all, no, I'm not surprised at all about the treatment of African American males by policemen. To me, that has not changed. Okay. Yes, there has been some progress and some movement in other areas of society, but not with policing. And when I was in my first incident with the police happened when I was 8 or 9 years old. And I know we press for time, and I don't want to go into a long discussion.
I think it's important that you tell the story and tell the background of that story.
Okay. Well, the things that stood out to me and the things that still affect me to this day, and I'm going to be blunt honest with you. I started school in a 2-room schoolhouse. They added a room to it and made it a 3-room schoolhouse. When I was in the 2nd grade, of course, I didn't live very far from the school. I used to be one of the first ones at school in the morning because, believe it or not, we were still burning coal in the stove to heat the school. And, we didn't have any gas. So I get there early one morning before anybody, and somebody had broken into the school. And Miss McCrae was the first teacher on the scene. So I ran to tell her what had happened, and she walked to a neighbor's house and called police, called the principal, and called the other teacher. And so they all pretty much arrived on the scene at the same time. And so from about 9 o'clock that morning, when the constable got there, and then later on the sheriff, they harassed me. They tried to make me confess that it was me and some of my friends who had broken into the school, who had stolen some of the items, and we knew where it was, to the point of tears. I mean, I was crying, and they just kept hammering away at me, and my mother showed up on the scene, and the sheriff of Clark County, Mississippi at the time, was a guy named Foster Dabbs, very brutal, very racist segregationist. And he shows up on the scene and he starts to press me about, you did it, we're going to take you to jail and all of these things, Now keep in mind, I'm 9 years old. And of course, like I told you earlier, my mother was the type that you had to really push her envelope in order to get a reaction out of her. And she just kind of got fed up with them treating me the way they were treating me. And she lashed out at the sheriff, something you did not do in Mississippi in those days. And he basically said in so many words, "Gal, shut up." And that has stayed with me. My mother was a grown woman and he said, "Gal, you shut up." And she had to shut up or risk going to jail. Now, when you're 9 years old, you don't understand a lot in this world, but you know deep down somewhere that your mother is not supposed to be treated like that. And so that stayed with me. I had another incident with my brother Charles involving Amos Ross, and I won't go into that one, but when I was in high school, I was working for the school system one summer. And they had me and several of the guys haul some trash to the dump and throw it away. And we were driving back to the campus, and we accidentally drove off of a bridge into a bayou. Almost drowned, actually, because when we turned over, everybody landed on top of me. But we got out of that. And in the meantime, we went and called the police because we had had an accident. Then we called the school. And when we got back to the truck, two white guys had drove up, asked us what happened. And we told them, we weren't driving fast. We just lost control of the truck because it was a big panel truck. I had never driven one of those before. And then all of a sudden, the sheriff's deputy shows up, asks us a few questions. And these white guys said, "Well, I'm going to tell you what happened. They were coming around that curve up there doing about 80 miles an hour. That's why they lost control." And he took their word for it, ignored everything that we had to say. And because I was driving, now keep in mind, I'm soaking wet. And they took me and put me in a jail cell for 2 hours, and I'm freezing, Just put me in a jail cell. Didn't ask if I was hurt, didn't ask if I needed to go to the hospital. You going to jail. And so I sat in there and until, Mr. Ward, our basketball coach, and one of the supervisors from the school system came to get me out. And my last incident happened about 3 years ago. One morning I was going to physical therapy. So Kitty, you and Chrissy can identify with this because the old Carl Heck building here in Thibodeau, there was a deputy sheriff sitting off the road over there, and I saw him. And so I'm driving to physical therapy, and I look up, and there's the lights coming behind me. He pulled me over. And, I'm not bragging, but I'm pretty well known in the city of Thibodeau. And he pulled me over, and he wants to run my license and my registration. And I said, "You need me to get out of the car?" He said, "No, stay where you're at, So he came back to the vehicle about 10 minutes later, and he was all smiles and everything. So evidently he ran my name, and somebody told him, who I was, And then he said, you know why I stopped you, huh?" I said, "No, have no idea." He said, "Because you hit the center line with your truck, and I thought you were impaired." Now, he's sitting 30 feet or more off of the road. There's no way he could have seen that. He's a young 20-something-year-old kid. And I guess he's trying to make a name for himself. But to me, that is harassment, classical. And so that's the first part of what I want to say. I know I'm going on, but I want to say this too, because I am going to be very, very honest about this. I had a couple of incidents in college that were blatant racism, but I had a lot more what I call now microaggressions, things people said to me. When I finished college for the first time, I had pretty much gotten over the blatant racist incidents, but those microaggressions started to weigh heavily on me. Mm-hmm. And I became angrier and angrier to the point that I was ready to hurt somebody. I was stationed in Alaska. As you know, I joined the Army. I was stationed in Alaska. Chrissy, you hadn't come along. Demetria was here. And the thing that turned me around, I read an article in the Seattle Post. It was written by a white man. He said something to the effect that, you know, I was beaten, I was shot, I was carjacked by a black man, and I was thrown out on the side of the interstate in a blinding rainstorm. He said, you know why I don't hate black people to this day? Is because the rest of the story is this. A black man came along, picked me up, took me to the hospital, saved my life, stayed with me till my family got there. And he basically said that you can focus on the bad things that happen to you in life, or you can focus on the good thing. You better choose to focus on the good people and the good things that happen to you, because if you focus on the bad people and the bad things, it will eat you up inside. And so from that day, I began to focus on the good people that were around me and not pay a lot of attention to the negative people. And so I guess that's why my personality is what it is today. I tried to stay away from the bad apples in society, the bad people, not even give them lip service if I don't have to, and focus on the good people. And I started thinking about that, and there were a lot of people in my undergraduate years in college that were decent to me. And so I started thinking about what they did for me and how they helped me. And I quit thinking about and dwelling on those fools, I'm gonna call them fools, that caused me to be so angry for a 2-year period there. Mm-hmm. So I hope I didn't go too long with that explanation, but I hope I answered your question, Christine.
Well, that was beautiful. But as you were talking, because some of these stories I have not heard, I could feel my whole body tensing up. So I can only imagine the tenseness in your body as you experience them in real time. So, but I really appreciate you sharing those stories. So, but the other part of that question, I'm gonna bring a comment up before I ask you to answer. But the other part of that question is, do you have hope for what's to come? But I want to bring this comment up. This is from Cecil. You know Cecil Rose.
Yes, I do. Hey, Cecil, I hope you can hear me.
Father, mentor, teacher, coach, Obie Hill have invested many principles and guidance in my life to make me the man I am today. He became a father when I didn't have one. So
thank you, Cecil. I really appreciate that, because you know, I really feel a strong connection to Cecil. Before Devin came along, you know, Cecil was like the son I never had. Mm-hmm. You know, so it was mutual, Cecil. I promise you, it was mutual. You gave a lot to me, and thank you. But Demetria and Christine, I do want to say one thing. You know, and I think this happens.
Thanks for pointing it out. I appreciate it.
Well, we can see you wiping your face. Come on, girl.
I know, but you didn't have to stop. You could have kept going.
Well, let me say this, you know, and this is for all of the young African-American males out there. If you experience police brutality, police harassment, try to get some help for it. You may think that, okay, they didn't take me to jail, I didn't get busted. I don't need any help. Believe me, you do need to talk to somebody. You need to get some counseling. You need to have somebody help you work through those experiences. I told several people, including Christina and Demetria, this. The first encounter I had with police when I was 9 years old left an impression on me to the point that even today, you know, I'm 70 years old now, even today, when I'm around a policeman in uniform, I tense up to this very day. And I know it goes back to that experience. I wish now that years ago I had talked to somebody to help me work through that. And so if you're a young man, African-American male, then talk to somebody, get some help, get some counseling, work through it, because you don't want to get to be 70 years old and still be tensing up in those situations. Mm-hmm. And now, Demetra, to get to your response, yes, I think that somebody said it best this morning when I was looking at television. This time, I think that with what happened to George Floyd is going to change a lot of things tremendously. For me, the jury is still out with policing. Mm-hmm. I have to actually see some of those changes. And I agree with what everybody says. There are some, I've run into some good policemen. I run into some good men and women who are policemen. But as everybody knows, it only takes one or two bad apples to give everybody a bad name. So the jury is out as far as police is concerned. But I think in other areas of society, I think what corporate America is starting to finally realize some of the things that they're trying to do. I think this time it will make a measurable difference, and there is hope in those areas for everybody.
Okay. And I think, sister, since you pointed out my teary-eyedness, it's because, I did know the story about Dad when he was 8 or 9 years old going to school, because like our dad, he's always been early for everything. Right. And he's always loved and had this passion for education. And so in this weird sense, it's like you actually went to school early because he wanted to be there to help set everything up and get all ready for the teachers, and to have that experience at such a young age. And it weighs on me, because the response toward his mom, like, I'm not a mother, but can you imagine seeing your child being harassed and then feeling like there's nothing I can do about it? Mm-hmm. That is such a heavy burden to have to carry. And, he could have interpreted that in a very different way. He could have seen that as weakness on her part. But at 8, 9 years old, he had to understand that she had no choice but to sit and take the harassment that she got. And I believe, and I don't think you said this part, I believe he went on to threaten her if she said anything, that he would take her to jail.
Yes.
And so that's why I was like, and to think that you have young Black boys having these sort of experiences, and folks wonder why they have the trauma that they have as Black men. And so then when he talked about the being angry, I'm like, God, this is why I'm always angry, because it's so hard to shake all of the stuff, especially when you've been dealing with it since 8 years old. So pardon me, y'all already know I'm you know me, Cleveland. You know your daughter, so no surprises here, but yeah, just feeling all of that. So,
well, sorry. And I feel that too, because, as we talked when we had Charlotte on about racism, and, I'm microaggressions is really not the term. It's violence, because it's a subtle way of attacking you. It's a subtle way of diminishing you. And I, shared this because I shared an article yesterday about, 13 microaggressions. And I'm like, child, sometimes I experienced 13 of them in one day. Yeah. So to not be angry, to not allow it to carry, because the other part about it is that, in the comment I made when a friend shared the post, is like, the microaggressions are kind of like gaslighting, because you start to doubt yourself. Like, is it just me? Like, am I the crazy one here? Like, what is going on? And so to know that the internalization of that, the stress, the strife that we carry, and then they say we have high blood pressure. It ain't because of what we eat. It's because we've been carrying the burden of racism for our entire existence here in this country. But let me go get some of these comments here. We have one from Jane Price, says, thank you for reminding to focus on the good people and things. It seems the hateful people and bad things get all the attention.
Yes.
Cecil was commenting that it was true. LaSonia says, Cecil, you are very lucky. So am I to have Uncle Cleveland in our lives. Sean, she made the comment, Happy Father's Day. She said, yes, I agree. The lasting effects is overwhelming and counseling is needed. It's definitely a trauma. And so we experienced that trauma multiple times. And for you to say you've even experienced as recent as 3 years ago, and probably any number of microaggressions when you're at a board meeting or what have you, that's a whole nother conversation. Charles Brown says, this is so beautiful. We need more conversations with men like Dr. Hill. I'm curious if he has a favorite book. So do you have a favorite book? You're definitely an avid reader. You read every day. Every morning you can find him on his exercise bike reading the Chronicles of Higher Education, the local newspaper, and a book, and probably grading papers at the same time. While folding clothes. So that's so
yeah.
A favorite book.
Well, let me say this. My undergraduate major was history. When I first went to college, my intentions was to be an attorney. But I learned a lot of history as an undergraduate student. I have dug deeper into history as an adult. So I still love reading biographies, historical things, not so much for the factual content, but I like to dig deeper into it to help me develop my critical thinking skills, And so I've learned so much from that. Let me give you a prime example, of course. And this is not to denigrate anybody. This is just to help us be more objective in our thinking. We know that the GI Bill was first proposed by Franklin Roosevelt, which was a good thing, back in the 30s after World War II, during World War II and in the post-World War II era. But the way and of course, I learned that in the history books. I learned that in college. But then as I got older, we dug deeper. We learned that, African-American men in the South, especially, but all over this country, they were denied benefits. There were multiple ways that people figured out where they could not get the housing assistance, the college or the vocational trade school assistance that was guaranteed in the GI Bill for all soldiers. But we found out that a majority of African-American men did not get that. And we can juxtapose that with what happens today with the CARES Act. A part of that act was designed for people who own small businesses, sole proprietorship. But we are learning now that, African-American sole proprietors are only getting a fraction of what was intended for them to run their business and restart their businesses. So some of these things still happen today. The optimism for the future is that now we have some platforms. We have Facebook. We have this medium. We have others that we can voice our opinions, and I encourage everybody to do that. Don't remain silent and suffer the way some of my ancestors had to remain silent. If the injustice is done and nobody knows about it and we keep it to ourselves, it will always be done. We have got to voice our opinions. We've got to say it, even if we write letters to the editor, whatever we have to do. I think Frederick Douglass said it best. He said, I'm an agitator, and we got to agitate all our lives. Well, let's agitate. So I encourage everybody to become agitators.
Mm-hmm.
So did you say if there was a favorite book?
No, I have favorite books in that genre of biographies, presidential reading biographies about former presidents, but digging deeper into the things that they had to do and the compromises that they had to make. Let me give you another example, a lot of African Americans love Franklin Roosevelt, and he did, don't get me wrong, he did a lot, so did Truman. But we need to give more credit to Eleanor Roosevelt, because if not for her, a lot of the things that the Tuskegee Airmen were able to achieve, it would not have been done, you know. And so reading those histories, reading those biographies where we can dig deeper and find out some of these things, that's what I like to do.
Well, give us one book that we should read.
The last book that I read that I think everybody should read is called Biased, and I'll let you have my copy of it. It's by Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt of Stanford University. And she talks mainly about implicit bias. She also talks about some of the things that happened to her in her life to make her ask the question. And, you know, all theses start pretty much with a question, you know. Why are these things continuing to happen with policemen in this country? Why do they continue to do the things that they do? Even though they get caught doing it, they still continue to do it. And then she talks about implicit bias, and she talks about the fact that racism, bias, prejudice, discrimination can be so deeply embedded within people. Sometimes they don't even know it's there. And, you know, the prime example is if you get on an elevator with an elderly white woman, she's going to clutch her purse. You know, rationally, there's no reason to do that because she doesn't know that person. They've never made that threat toward her or anything. But her irrational, implied, implicit biases take over. And of course, the one thing she know that is Black man danger. She grabs that purse.
Mm. Well, we have some more comments here. We have from Rosalind Ross. She says, Dr. Hill is forever and always a scholar. Cecil made another comment here. He said, we've been persecuted all our lives. The narrative is wrong. The media is putting out there. I experienced racism in sports at SLU. I thought about Coach when I was in college many times. His voice to never quit something is still in me. We have another one says, stand up for what you believe in. Rosalind's asked, are we going to have a Hey Sister book club? We might need to start one because we've had some good book suggestions. And then another one, be an agitator. Love it. So those are some of the comments that we have coming in. So we've come to the top of the hour. Sister, I want to ask, do you have a final question that you want to ask before we get ready to close out?
I don't have a final question. I just had a comment. I just wanted to say very much so thank you for being a great father to us. We are very, very lucky. You know, I know I'm crazy and all of that, but but you like me and I like you and I've kept you around and vice versa. But you've been an amazing father to us. And, you know, just reading some of the comments and hearing some of the thoughts that people have had, it goes to show that, you know, even when you're not trying, because you're funny to me that you don't understand the impact that you've had on people. But I guess that's what makes you such a beautiful person, that you are humble in that way, that it doesn't even faze you that you are impacting people. I remember when I first moved to Mississippi, and Derek ran into somebody and he came back and he's like, yeah, I met this guy. He knows your dad. And he was just talking about how great your dad was. And so it always gave me a huge sense of pride to have people who always have wonderful, positive things to say about my dad. And I pray deeply. I guess I need to remix how I talk to Jesus or something, but I pray that he gives me an ounce of what he was able to give you, because sometimes, Dad, you have always been the one to be objective, want to see the other side of a situation. So I want to just be mad, and you want me to think about, well, think about it from their perspective or what have you. So, yeah, just, and you know, I always say one of the most important memories for me growing up is that you always cooked us breakfast every morning. And I think that it speaks volumes, because so, you know, especially in this country, we know how poverty looks. We know that there are a lot of children who sometimes don't get one meal, and if they get that meal, it's in at school. And I think this whole COVID epidemic has revealed a lot about some of the challenges that we have, that racism, how deeply entrenched racism is, even in the midst of a global health pandemic. But I can always say that every day from first grade or kindergarten, whatever, to 12th grade, I knew I would have a meal and my father would cook that for me. And so I love you. Thank you so much.
Love you too.
Well, there's some more comments here, but there's one thing that I forgot to talk about it, but I do want to talk about it. So the comment here, thank you for the encouraging words and sharing your wisdom, Dr. Hill. We have Happy Father's Day, father and grandfather, because you are that. Uncle Cleveland, you're an inspiration to so many people. I thank God for you. I love you. Happy Father's Day. True, Christina, if he's selling it, then I'm buying it. That's talking about dealing with all that anger. That's what Rosalind says. And someone says, thanks for sharing tonight with your father. I was truly blessed and inspired. But one of the things, and I know because I did not bring it up earlier and I wanted to, and this will be my kind of closing question. So as you know, some of you might not know, but so our Father gave us the gift of life. We're thankful for you for being there for us. But then Christina had the opportunity to also give you the gift of life. So
Yes.
tell us about that experience for you to be a transplantee and have your daughter make that full circle moment for you.
So you just try to mess me all the way up today.
I'm gonna mess you all the way up tonight. Go ahead, cry, girl.
Well, I have to give a little history on that first, but I also have to say, I know this is Father's Day and everything, but your upbringing and everything was not just by your dad; it was by your mom too.
We know, but it's
Father's Day. We talk about you.
I understand that, but I don't want to lose sight of that fact because it takes. I've always said, number one, that there are some mothers out there who have had to raise children by themselves and have done a fantastic job. But I still feel like if you can have both parents in the home, it still makes a big difference. So I will say that. Second thing I will say is I'm going to give you again, Bias by Dr. Jennifer Eberhard. I think that is good reading for everybody. But I'm going to go real quickly back to the 50s when I started, hearing about so many people on my mother's side of the family who were passing away in their late 40s and early 50s, Aunt Willa Buckley, Aunt Irene, Uncle Paul, Uncle Joseph Buckley, and everybody would just say, well, it's those kidneys again, those kidneys, I never paid any attention to any of that because, I was young, and so I didn't really understand it, So fast forward to the 80s, and my brother Lee, who has since passed away, was here for Mardi Gras one year, and he was feeling really bad, and of course, he goes back to Richmond, Virginia, where he lived, and he wound up having to go on dialysis because his kidneys were failing. That's when I began to understand this thing about polycystic kidney disease, PKD. And then, of course, he was blessed enough to have a donor, and he got another kidney before he, eventually passed away from cancer. So the reason that I knew that I had the disease is because I called him up before he got his kidney, and I said, I'll be your donor, and he said, are you sure? And I said, yeah. So I go to the hospital here in Thibodeau, see the doctor, and they run all the tests and everything, and they come back and say, you can't be a donor because you got the disease. And that was a shock to me because I felt fine. I was still exercising perfect, no problems at all, And they told me exactly what was going to transpire over the years. And so finally, about 12, 13 years ago, I started seeing a nephrologist, and he told me when your kidney function gets down to 20%, we are going to put you on the transplant list and consider dialysis. And then there Christina stepped in and said, Daddy, you're not going to go on dialysis. I'm going to give you a kidney. And so when I got down to that 20%, actually got down to 18%, my nephrologist was going to put me on dialysis, and I told her what my daughter had said. And he said that, well, okay, if she's really going to do it, then we're gonna give you some medication to extend so you don't have to go on dialysis. And then we're going to set you up with an appointment at Tulane to get it done. And so the the rest of that is pretty much history, And I thank Christina privately. I thank her publicly. I call her every year on the anniversary. September the 14th will be our 10th anniversary, and I'll thank her very publicly today. And I said this at a family reunion one time. We do give our children life, but we never think that our children are going to have to give us life one day. And so you gave me life, daughter, and I appreciate that. Words cannot express how gratified I am. And not only did you give me a kidney, you gave me a great kidney, because every time I go get a checkup, they tell me, boy, this is a good kidney because it is still functioning very good, And so, the end part of that story is that, polycystic kidney disease is a disease that affects about, once it gets into your family genetics, it affects about 50% of your children. And sure enough, I have 2 children. One of them didn't have the disease, the other one does. And so I will stop there. And Demetri, if you want to talk about your part in this, then you can.
Well, I don't have a part. I'm just living my best life until they tell me otherwise. And, who knows how the full circle will go. I was listening to, I think, NPR the other day, and they were talking about this new CRISPR, like where the DNA can be spliced and gonna be changed. And so I am holding out hope for whatever miracle treatment to really change the genetic profile. So, but until then, I'm gonna keep living as healthy as I can and the best I can, being the daughter that does have this, and just go from there. But like someone asked me the other day, because I sat down, we were having a consultation about our wills and everything, and I was like, well, I'm good until I'm not. Like, that's really what it is. You're good until you're not, right? And that's kind of what you were good until you weren't, and until they say, okay, now you have to do something different. So I'm good right now. I'm trying to stay as good as I can.
I will say this, though, for those people who know me and see me from time to time, they probably thinking that, wow, he's getting a big old gut on him. But, I want to let everybody know it's not a gut. The cysts that overtake your kidneys and cause your kidneys to fail also multiply inside your body. So all of those things that are making my stomach bigger are cysts that are growing inside. So I may have a little bit of gut, but it's not that much of a gut. It's the cysts that are growing in my body.
Well, at least they don't ask you if you're pregnant like they asked me.
Well, I hope they don't ever do that. I hope they don't ever do that. So, but can I close with one thing?
Yes, I wanted to ask you if you had a closing comment or closing remark before we shut it down.
Yeah, my closing comment is this: is that we talked about having the tenacity to keep going forward, but added to that, I don't know where it came from. It may have come from my dad. Probably did. Probably come from somewhere in our DNA. But don't ever let people tell you what you can't do. And I'll give you a couple of stories. I was teaching junior high school, and I got an offer to go and work at a university in athletics. And I was told that you cannot make the transition from junior high school to college athletics. And I basically said, why? And people said, well, nobody's ever done that before. And I said, well, somebody's going to do it now. And, after 7 years in athletic department, without a degree in physical education, I was offered a position in the physical education department. People said, well, you can't make that transition from athletics to physical education to the academic side of the house. And I said, well, why? They said, well, nobody's ever done that before without having a degree in that field. And I said, well, somebody's going to do that now. And then, when I started working on my doctorate and working full time, somebody said, you cannot work full time and go to school full time and get a doctorate degree. And I said, well, why? And they said, because nobody's ever done that before. And I said, well, somebody's going to do it now. And when I became dean of the College of Education, they said, most people who had ever become deans of education had been a principal of a school before. I became a principal later on, but I hadn't become a principal then. And I said, well, why not? And they said, well, nobody's done that before. And I said that, hey, somebody's going to do it now. So if you let people tell you what you can't do simply because it's not been done before, then it will stifle your dream. Don't ever let anybody tell you what can't be done. If you believe it can be done, it won't be done until you get out and do it.
Oh, I got to type that in the comments here. So hold on one second, y'all. If you believe it can be done.
If you believe it can't be done, it can't be done until you get out and do it.
Okay. Get out and do it. Yes.
Child, and stop making
Obie Hill. That is perfect. That is perfect. Well, with that being said, I would like to say, everybody, thank you for joining us tonight in this very special episode. This has warmed my heart. So
it's warm mine, because I don't just be crying like this.
Well, Dad, we're going to ask you to stay on the line with us. Everybody else, please follow, share this episode with the men in your life. Maybe it will be an inspiration and motivation, especially the conversation around seeking some help. If you have been the victim of any type of trauma or violence, the importance of seeking help, because mental health is a key component into our overall health. And as Black men, we know that they are under attack. And as Black women who are supporting them, we also bear that burden as well. So we all need that help and support one another. And we appreciate your support in tuning in tonight. And we ask that you follow, share this episode. If you have missed any part and want to go back, it'll be uploaded on YouTube. So you can go to our YouTube channel, follow us there as well. And Daddy, we just want to say thank you. We love you so very much. And we really appreciate you sitting with us and talking and sharing your story.
Finally coming to Hey Sister.
Love you more. Love you more.
All right. With that being said, I'm going to end the broadcast. Stay on the line, Daddy.
Okay.